Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today, I'm going to be discussing this book, Five Broken Blades. I bought it new at Coas for $33, and I honestly don't even think it should be $23. I bought it for a couple reasons. Firstly, it's because of the cover art and design, which is by Elizabeth Turner Stokes, and I believe I've heard or mentioned that name before on a book or two. End paper illustration by Juho Choi, interior design by Jennifer Valero. I think the end paper illustration is this, and that is actually part of why I bought it. And knowing that is an expense that would increase the cost of something, I can understand it costing $33 for this book, but I did not think it was worth $33. This, like so many other books, is one of those kind of Suicide Squad kind of stories where a absurdly valuable task is assigned to a group of 5 or 6 individuals who all are on some level criminal or outcasts and are all experts in a chosen field. And in this case, kind of predictably, it's also specifically 3 different couples. And I'll show the inside cover art as well. The 6 people involved, and the cover implies that it's 5 broken blades, swords or something like that. It's 6 characters, and their assignment is to assassinate a emperor, someone who has been impossible to kill because he is the bearer of a magic item that specifically makes the bearer impossible to kill, so long as he has it on. And that magic item is the Emperor's crown. In the case of this crown, they do discuss how there have been methods, attempts to kill previous emperors by getting him during the shower or during a bath, something where his crown is removed. But it's one of those books where the twist is incredibly obvious to see coming, and it doesn't feel like a satisfying twist, which is always hard to achieve, but you always look forward to it. Maybe this time will be different. One of the reasons I picked up this book is also because it's really funny, and I think I mentioned this in the year in review video from 2025 as well, but I wasn't a fan of the book A Broken Blade, and I thought that if it was the similar kind of title, an N number of blades, specifically N broken blades, it might be better. A Broken Blade I didn't like. 5 broken blades I also didn't like. If I saw 7 or 3 or 9 or 8, whatever, however many broken blades at this point, I might get one of them. You know, scientifically speaking, you need at least 3 different examples for a trend. You know, coincidences too that, oh, 2 are just bad and they have broken blades in the title. But 3 or more, I may pick up other ones. So if there's an author out there that is thinking of a name and needs at least one person to read their book, I would be willing to read another book if it was titled some number of broken blades that is neither A or 5. I'd be willing to read it in the hopes that it's better than these. I have heard good things about Mike Corlin's book, This Five Broken Blades. I've heard good things about it. I just was not impressed. It's got an interesting amount of action, and it's got an interesting cast of characters, but like I've said before, it's just one of those Suicide Squad stories, and they're a dime a dozen. That just seems to be the thing that people like doing, is putting together five or six unlikely co-conspirators and giving them an impossible task. And in this case, there is a sequel, just like so many others. All of the books I've read that are similar tend to end in failure. That way they can set up for success as a trilogy. And it would be nice to see one of those stories and also they're successful. But it's not really something I see. And that is one of the biggest disappointments about it, is just how um, cookie cutter a lot of these books are, how very paint by numbers they are. And that's, again, that's one of the issues I have with other books. I'm gonna have to cheat, look on my phone because I can't remember the names of all of them. I know I've done videos about them in the past. I just can't remember their names. I guess Return of the Wizard King is one of those, and I said that was very bland, cookie cutter kind of story. The Storm Singers is kind of close to that, but not quite. They're not criminals, and they're two adventurers that end up stumbling into a story, and then the cast expands. It was a blue cover. Among Thieves is one of those. That one does it kind of well, but also not, because it ends with a twist that, like, I just didn't want to see coming. This book, there is some good to it, and I actually did like two of the characters. There's a kind of enforcer, a bodyguard, but what he is basically a hitman. But he often does a lot of like enforcing work for others. The character Royo was really interesting, and then I forget the name of it. This also being another aspect of this book that I'm okay with. I'm not the biggest fan of. That's the best way to put it. Is it keeps on shifting perspectives like so many of these books do, and if you're doing that, it should feel like there's progression. And instead, what they do is mostly use it to introduce a new element. And I just don't like that. I want there to be a more consistent flow to these kinds of books, and there never is. So I did like Royo. I did like there was one who was a prince. Um, I'm not the biggest fan of secret royalty in these kinds of stories. This one felt less bad. Was also more interesting because there was, like, the prince was very closeted in a way. But overall, the prince was a good character, and there was another, what was it? There was an assassin who had been trained to effectively be, like, if she spilled her blood or dropped her blood in a glass and someone drank it, then they would be exposed to basically every poison. She had been in her youth inoculated against basically every poison in existence. And what that character is involved with, her backstory is fun to read, and she is a good assassin. She's a good character, but the remaining three members of the cast are just difficult to like and difficult to want to see succeed. So there's that. One other thing I'm not the biggest fan of is this is one of those settings where it's a very isolated world. There are other nations far off in the distance, but a giant island that takes a month to travel from one end to the other I think it's more than a month really, and like 3 nations. The United Kingdoms, for the longest time, had more than 3 kingdoms on that one particular island. Japan was ostensibly united, but was a lot of different warlords trying to rule their piece of the pie. And so, this kind of setting where it's this huge region, and also there's only 3, maybe 4 civilizations, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I wish there would be a more dynamic setting. And that just isn't what this one is. And to be fair, there are other books that I like that don't do that, but that's also kind of the point. Kings of the Wild does that, where there's a big continent and only 5 or 6 human nations on one part of the forest, and then on the other far end of the forest, another one large empire. And the forest between them is several hundred miles wide. I think it's almost 1,000. It's an incredibly long distance across. But even then, you get to see all of the different civilizations in that one. Whereas in Five Broken Blades, you only see 2. One of them recently, one of the 4 was recently subjugated, so it's only 3, and you only encounter 2 of them. Though you do encounter people from the 4th one that recently was subjugated. But it's not my cup of tea. One of the things I liked about, say, Fire Emblem Awakening is that... No, that's actually a bad example. That's a really bad example. Should I keep this in the video? I'll be honest, there are very few things I like about Fire Emblem Awakening, and one of them is the character Pan, the Togwell, best girl in that series. But like, Fire Emblem I think is a bad example. It's just, there are a lot of stories where to minimize the stress of the creator. I think it's that. It might be just, in general, people don't want to have too many different countries. And one of the things I like about, say, the Forgotten Realms or other D&D fantasy settings is that there are usually a lot of kingdoms. Golarion is famous for having like uh 20 to 30 different nations within its one subcontinent. Like, the variety of nation states is what makes a lot of these settings interesting. And Five Broken Blades doesn't have that. It focuses on one, everyone has been wronged by the government of this one empire, or they are they benefit from defeating it somehow. So it's a very bog standard Suicide Squad kind of novel. And for that, it just wasn't interesting. It's one of those that I think I'm probably going to put into the used book marketplace because, you know, I bought it for $33 and was just unimpressed. And it looks good on the cover, on the you know, on this end page art. This art inside looks really nice. The cover, the design, it looks good. It's just mediocre otherwise. So, yeah. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.